and we sought joy, and we wanted there to be love. And the world isn't always that way, and that whole Advent season is designed to sort of get you longing for the feast of the Christ. And then you get to let your hair down and eat all the kind of stuff you're not supposed to eat. But you could do something healthy today. Eat all that rubbishy food and then do something really healthy and have a nap. And that will really make you feel better. I know for some of you, I know Christmas can be a hard season as well because it's attached to so much emotion. And for those of you here who find this a little bit of a difficult season, be assured that your Savior sees you and understands you and find your rest in Him. So we're going to think about some weird things here this morning. I don't know if you are aware of Ripley's Believe It or Not. This was a book, a series of books you could buy. It was a TV show. Mr. Ripley made his money selling the weird and wonderful to people. And you can actually go to boardwalks and other amusement places and walk into these Ripley's or Believe It or Not kind of places. And it's full of all the weird and wonderful kind of stuff. And I had, as a child, and even now to some extent, was always attracted by weird news and weird kinds of stuff. Like, for instance, in the Guinness Book of World Records, for instance, I would always look for the weird guy that got the tallest person, the smallest person, the guy with the longest beard down to his knees. Like, why would you bother? Right? And it's always some guy from some far-flung remote village in Tibet or something, you know. And I always found those stories kinds of interesting. Ripley's Believe It or Not had this weird story about a guy who could turn his head 270 degrees. Now, you think about that, 270 degrees, you know, most of us, if we're lucky, we can do 180. But the older you get, it's less and less until you're stiff-necked people, right? But this guy, he worked so that he could make it look like he was facing backwards when weird stuff. And just in the sense of weird, my son went to Catalan when he was 16 for a year of exchange students. And Catalan has a weird Christmas tradition, which they call Cagatio. And the kids would, which is known as the pooping log, to put it in plain terms. And what would happen is they would get this log, which is the Tio de Nadal. And if I didn't say that right, I'm sorry, I don't speak Catalan. And this was a log with a face on it, and they would stuff it full of toys and candy. And then on Christmas Day, they would beat it with a stick and dance around it and sing a song demanding that it would poop out its gifts for the children. So this is like this weird, really weird tradition that existed. And so what is the point of me telling you all this is, well, the world is full of weird stories, and this kind of weird stuff is interesting to me. And this Christmas story is a simply weird story as well. Mary and Joseph returning to Bethlehem, of course, is not weird. It's simply weird, but in many cases, aspects, it's a very simple story. In this case, it's simple history. They returned to Bethlehem because of the registration or the census, and that's in Luke's gospel that Delene read in Luke in chapter 2, verse 1. A decree went out from Emperor Augustus. The census is simple reality located in verifiable history. Augustus was an established, well-known emperor, and he was one of the Caesars, and he ruled from 27 BC to 14 BC, which is smack in the middle of when you would expect Jesus to be born if he's born during Augustus's reign. And so this is simple, verifiable history. And the reason that they would have these censuses, and on average they would do one every 14 years, the reason they would do these things is to register people for multiple reasons, primarily for money. If you're occupying a foreign nation, you want to find out things like the names of people and who lives there, who's the head of the household, does he have any property, does he have any possessions that are worth taxing, like land holdings and sheep and flocks and vineyards and those kinds of things, because whatever you own is open to land tax, and so they would do a census to figure out how much money to take off you. And then they would also count how many people were in your household, and the bigger the household you had, the more money they would take from you. So it was very progressive tax in that way. The more you had, the more you were taxed. The less you had, the less you were taxed, but everyone was paid tax. And the reason you would do this kind of thing, do these censuses, is so that you could actually collect the correct kind of money. It also helped the emperors to figure out things like, how big should my army be in Judea? How many people are there? And if there's lots of people there, then I have to figure out I have to have a certain amount of army there. So that's why you would know. And there's also the reason you would do it is because if the people in Judea are increasing over the course of your reign, it's a good propaganda ploy for saying, look how wealthy and prosperous these people are under the rule of my being Caesar. And so there's genuinely good historical reasons why they would do these kinds of things. So it's simple, verifiable history that Mary and Joseph would return to his home to be counted in a census. The second thing about this story, although it may be simply weird, it's also simply nature. Mary gives a child to be born. Its child being born is simply natural. It's a simply natural thing. And it's an everyday occurrence. Just a quick search on Mr. Google will tell you that somewhere between 365,000 and 380,000 people are born every day. So there's not like some surprising thing that Mary should give birth, because women are doing it and have been doing it since there have been women, since there have been Eve. And so that's not an exactly surprising thing. And she had a simple birth in a simple, natural way that you would expect to have a birth. And it wasn't, surprise, surprise, in a barn in the middle of a field, despite what your little nativity scene at home is telling you. It's worth thinking a little bit about the way that this happened here. This is a cutaway sort of view of a typical house in a place like Bethlehem. Bethlehem was a village. It was a town. It was a suburb, if you like. And so there were a whole bunch of houses. And they weren't sitting in the middle of fields. These houses were sitting next door to other houses, next door to other houses on streets. And the people lived in these homes. They were two-story homes in the main. And the upstairs place was the living quarters. The downstairs place is where you kept the kitchen and where you would keep your animals so that they had a place, because you weren't in a field. This wasn't a farm. This was a suburb. So where are you going to keep your animals? You're going to keep them someplace where they'll be protected, especially at night, and especially from thieves and wolves. And so you would have them at night kept in a place. This is where you would keep a sheep or a goat or your chickens or those kinds of things in a place like this. Now, Mary and Joseph arrive in Bethlehem because that's the town of his birth. That's the town of his family. And he arrives to his family. He doesn't arrive in a town where he doesn't know anybody. And it's beyond inconceivable that he would arrive with his pregnant wife into a town where he has family, and the family would tell him, sorry, dude, no place for you here. Go find a hotel. But this is how our brains are thinking. And so then Joseph goes to a hotel with Mary, and there's no room in the inn. Now, the problem with all that is that the word translated in chapter 2, verse 7, she gave birth to her firstborn son and wrapped him in bands of cloth and laid him in a manger because there was no place for them in the inn. That word "inn" there has been translated in our brains to mean a hotel. But that word "inn" is the same word that Luke uses in chapter 22, verse 11, which is translated guest room or upper room. And so the thing that to picture here is that Mary and Joseph probably arrived after the rest of the family. There's a crowd in Bethlehem for the census. The house upstairs is full. Mary's about to give birth. The last place she wants to give birth is in the midst of a whole bunch of men and women upstairs. So she goes downstairs and gives birth downstairs and lays her son in a manger. That's what you would expect to happen. These are normal people. This is natural way of it. There would have been women around. She would have been midwives. She would have given birth in a semi-private place downstairs away from prying eyes. This is the kind of thing you would use here. If you really meant an inn, like a hotel, like we think of an inn, Luke knows the word to use in the story of the Good Samaritan. The Good Samaritan took the person he wounded and took him to an inn. It's a different word. And so our minds just need to wrap our head around what's going on here. It's natural, simple history that this census took place, and it's simple history that Mary, and simple nature that Mary gives birth in a hospitable place, overcrowded, but simply fairly simple home. No throne, no palace, no wealth. The story of simple history and its simple birth. And we know that they were simple people because a little bit later on in this chapter, after 40 days, Mary takes her child to be presented after he's been circumcised on the 8th day, and then he's presented to the temple. This is standard Jewish law required in the Old Testament. And the Old Testament requires in Leviticus chapter 12, verse 8, that you are to give a sheep, a lamb, as a sacrifice for the birth of a child. But if you haven't got a lamb because you're poor, then you can bring 2 turtle doves. And this is what we read here, Mary does. So we're reading in this story here that Mary and Joseph are simple people who can't afford a lamb, and so they're giving the offering of a poor person's provision. The nature of his birth and the poverty of his parents are pretty simple truths. Zechariah, who is mentioned in the first chapter of Luke, who is Jesus' uncle, who is also the father of John the Baptist, is also mentioned as a simple man. His wife is a simple woman. They're nobodies, everyday people doing everyday, normal, nobody kind of stuff here. And so my question then is, if this is simple history, and it is, and it's simply nature, and it is, and these are just simple people living simple lives according to the laws of the people of the day, then what the heck are we doing here on a Thursday? Something weird about this story as well. And the first thing that's really weird is the weird appearance of angels. This does not happen every day. It happens 3 times in this story. Jesus, his uncle, Zechariah, has an appearance of an angel who tells him that John the Baptist will be born. Mary and Joseph all get visits of angels. And then on the night Jesus is born, more angels appear to shepherds. So there's all this sudden appearance of angels all of a sudden. So what all this weird angel stuff is telling us is that this birth of Jesus is not going to be just another baby born. This is a different kind of story. It's simple history and simple nature and simple people, but this story suddenly isn't simple anymore. I don't know about any of you here, but when my wife told me that she was going to have a child, I had no visions or dreams of angels. They did not appear, and I don't know if they appeared to any of you either. And I don't know if you know anyone to whom angels appeared to warn them or tell them or advise them of the coming events of their lives. Something else is going on here. Now, depending on your worldview, this simple story is simply weird because it's supernatural, and depending on your worldview, the story suddenly gets really interesting or loses all credibility, just depending on what you think. Gabriel, who appears to Zechariah alone and Mary alone, is described in Luke in chapter 1, verse 19, as the one who stands in the presence of God. He showed up in the book of Daniel, and so there's some history in the Bible of him. He is the chief messenger of God and is given the task of informing unique and important information to selected individuals over human history. But to Joseph, it's a dream. To Zechariah and Mary, he shows up practically. To Joseph, it's a dream. He appears, and those angels and their appearances and in the dreams of Joseph make this story weird. And the weird thing about angels is when they show up, it's rare. And when they do, it's even more rare for them to show up to more than one person at a time. Now, with the shepherds, and with shepherds means more than one, could have been 50, could have been 2. We don't know how many shepherds. That's unusual for angels to appear to more than one person at a time. Usually it's one at a time. Which means that if a person says they saw an angel appeared to them in a dream or showed up in their bedroom, you would be right to say, prove it. And you would not be able to, because there would be no other witnesses. If I told you that an angel appeared to me, 3 things are possible. I'm lying, I'm a lunatic, maybe it really happened. But if other people are coming along and independently saying, oh yeah, an angel came to me as well, then maybe there's some merit to the story. If I came and said, last night I had a dream of an angel that such and such a thing was going to occur, and then someone independently says, I had a dream from an angel who told me the same kind of thing, then suddenly there seems to be some merit to this weird story that maybe these things really did happen. The story starts to get some credence here. So the angel showing up, that makes the story weird. But the second thing that makes it weird, sorry, they're the angels. The second thing that makes it weird is weird way of getting pregnant. moms and fathers and grandparents here today, if your granddaughters or daughters tell you that they have received an immaculate conception, I would suggest that you don't believe them. They're lying to you. Don't tell your children when they tell you this thing, really, Mom, I'm a virgin, I never slept with a man. Nobody's buying it, right? And we wouldn't now, and they didn't then. Joseph's response, recorded in Matthew's Gospel in chapter 1, is exactly what you would expect. He hears this story and comes to the assumption that you would expect him to come to, that Mary is sleeping around. And so his reaction is, I'm not going to marry this woman. She's used goods. This is what you would expect. Everybody knows how girls get pregnant, and it isn't like this. But all these angelic voices coming to Zechariah and Joseph and Mary and the shepherds are setting the scene. They're paving the way. They're preparing the reader to understand that when Mary actually ends up pregnant, we should not be surprised. And if I'm prepared to accept angels in this story, then why not a virgin birth? I mean, let's go boots all in, right? Okay, well, we're going to have angels. Let's have virgin births. Let's do it all. Now, the thing is, this is entirely a highly scandalous thing that's going on here. And you might be able to excuse Mary for coming up with this story. She has a lot to lose here. If Mary is sleeping around and now she's pregnant, she loses everything. And so you can understand why she would come up with such a story. Now, God did this, I'm not sleeping around. She's betrothed to Joseph, and in those days, betrothal was a formal kind of thing, less so than us with engagement. It usually involved the two families. It usually involved a ring or some other kind of gift. There was usually a meal or a feast to celebrate the engagement. There may have been contracts of dowry price, bride prices settled on, and down payments made on that bride price. Mary was worth X number of goats and sheep or whatever she was worth, and a part down payment would have been made for this. This is a binding kind of contract, and so if Mary breaks the rules, Joseph has the right to literally divorce her. It's called a divorce. It's seen that way. And although they're not actually sleeping together at this stage, they are effectively married for up to a year. So if Mary is sleeping around, she's in big trouble because she loses a potential husband. She's probably going to end up being a single mother. She's probably never going to see marriage again. She's going to be living a life of utter poverty for the rest of her life as a scorned woman and having to live this difficult life of a single mom who has gone around cheating on her ex-husband, boyfriend. She has a lot to lose here. There's shame, there's scandal, there's guilt. Of course she's making up this story. It's what you would expect. However, there's absolutely no reason in logical world that we live in why Joseph would go along with this. He has nothing to gain and everything to lose by agreeing to this story that he didn't sleep with her and yet somehow she's pregnant. And yet it wasn't another man's baby. He has everything to lose and nothing to gain. She has nothing to gain and everything to lose. And yet what you see here is that you have to come up with an explanation of why Joseph would act so irrationally. We can understand. And maybe the reason that Joseph is acting irrationally is because an angel appeared to him in a dream and told him that his wife, Mary, was going to give birth to a child that came from God. There's no indication in the story that Joseph ever proclaimed, oh, now Mary and I were sleeping together. He never proclaimed that for himself. It was always the story that Mary had told, that Joseph had told, was always the same story. This is this child of God. And so that's weird. That's a weird way of getting pregnant. And having these angels show up is simply weird as well. And the other thing that's kind of weird about it is how all this fulfills a whole bunch of prophecy. And when you get born, and Michael, you were born on Christmas Day, you didn't fulfill a whole bunch of prophecy, I don't think. Except maybe your mother said he's going to be born tomorrow, and he was, because mothers know these things. But otherwise, that's about the only prophecy you would have fulfilled. The fact that he was born in Bethlehem, the fact that he was born of a virgin, the fact that he was from the line of David, the flight to and return from Egypt, and the massacre of innocents, which we didn't read, which happens in Matthew's gospel, causing weeping in Ramah, and a whole range of other things that go on in the early life of Jesus are fulfillment of Old Testament prophecies. Now, there was a guy, his name was Peter W. Stoner, and he was a mathematician and an astronomer, and he wrote a paper and a book in the 1940s called, I haven't got the name of the book. It was a paper that he wrote. And what he tried to do was perform a calculation to estimate the odds of someone fulfilling all of these prophecies, and not just the ones about his birth, but also about all the things that Jesus' life fulfilled. And he calculated the things out, and you can read his paper, and I think it's in The Case for Christ. I think you can find these details in that book as well that was written. The probability would be 1 in 10 to the 24. Infinitesimally small is the point here. The chances of someone fulfilling all these prophecies in their life is infinitesimally small. It's too coincidental that Jesus would fulfill these prophecies. Maybe the answer is it's supernatural. Yet the supernatural of this story is a reasonable explanation as to why the story has endured for so long. And it helps explain, at least in part, why the world seems to have changed from that day on. You think about the last 2,000 years of human history, and despite all its ups and downs, and yes, the downs have been very, very down, it's a remarkably good story because the followers of Jesus are in it. The presence of the church is widely credited with a net positive impact over the course of history on education, health, social justice, welfare, and ultimately the establishment of liberal democracies. Sure, the church has not been perfect, but imagine a world in which the church never existed. Imagine the last 2,000 years without the church. And you kind of can. Look at the Islamic world. Compare the Islamic world to the Western world, which is based itself on Judeo-Christian history. Now, that doesn't make the Western world Christian, but the ethos is there. Or look at the Hindu world. Or look at any of the other worlds where Christianity did not make a strong impact. Something about this Christ child changed the course of human history. And if it isn't the supernatural truth the church claims it to be, then secularists have to come up with a better explanation, and they often fail to do so. God came in the flesh. That's the story we're telling this morning. And you would expect the story to get weird. You would expect the world to change. And if you're having serious doubt about whether any of this is true, you're not alone. The people in Jesus' day doubted it so much they ended up killing him. It's not unusual for us to doubt these things. Mary and Joseph and Zechariah and Elizabeth and the shepherds are all telling this simply weird story. And although it doesn't prove it's true, one of the tests for the truthfulness of a story is to ask yourself, what does anyone have to gain by telling it? And sticking to it in the face of great persecution. What benefit is there to Mary or Joseph or to the disciples or to the shepherds? What benefit is there to them holding to this story? What do they have to lose? In many cases, the followers of Christ lost everything, and yet they never denied the story. Could it be that this simply weird story has endured for so long because it's simply true, and that believing in this Christ child causes you not to lose anything, but to gain everything? The true meaning of life itself. And it is that life that has motivated the church to proclaim the weird story of this child for generations, and will do for generations more. For unto us a child is born. Unto us a son is given. And the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. And the zeal of the Lord will perform this. May you be blessed this morning as you celebrate the birth and life of our Savior Jesus Christ. And may God be with you until we meet again. Amen.